Okay, everybody, we're going to get started again. Again, I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Charles Shaw. I'm an American writer and filmmaker, activist, and editor. I wrote a book called Exile Nation, Drugs, Prisons, Politics, and Spirituality. I made a documentary film called the Exile Nation Project, which is an online archive of interviews. It's an oral history project, people who've been affected by drug laws and criminal justice laws in America. And I'm currently in progress finishing a new film, which is an adaptation of my book partially, and also a kind of an extension of the whole Exile Nation metaphor, which I'll go into a little bit later. And at the end of this talk, I'm going to show some footage from this new film. So I would like to begin with a quote from a writer named Kingsley Dennis. For long periods of human history, there has been active forces penetrating our world that seek to keep humanity asleep and distracted from themselves. Also, that these forces are aware of the true power of human consciousness, and that the social power structures used to influence and manipulate the masses would collapse if true human potential were to be exercised. Therefore, in the pursuit of control and power, certain forces active upon the earth aim to artificially suppress the natural evolution of human consciousness. Humanity is caught in a struggle, and our consciousness is the battleground. It may come as unnerving news to some to hear that humanity is constantly being bombarded by forces and events beyond our control. This does not make us impotent, however. All natural organisms are under the influence of external forces. Yet with humanity, there are also other forces at work. These forces are deliberate, more often than not man-made, and manipulate with intent. They aim to persuade if possible and coerce if necessary. It is these forces that seek to target the remaining spaces where humanity has a modicum of free choice and free will. To some degree, these forces are a part of the requirements of civilization to shepherd and organize a burgeoning population. Yet, over and above this, there exists exploitative forces that work against the laws of conscious evolution. It is these forces and the need to overcome them that form the core theme of our times. The perpetual battlefield is what we know as our everyday lives. Our education, our work, our leisure, our emotional and spiritual well-being, and our conscious thinking. Yet the armaments of this struggle are not guns, tanks, airplanes, bombs, or battle cruisers. It is much more subtle than this. It is less hardware and more software. It is, in effect, a very silent war. And it is a war which, I hope to show, is even more important than the tragic physical scourges occurring on our beautiful planet. It is a war that targets not only the present, but also the very long-term future of our civilization. And it has been going on for as long as humankind has existed on planet Earth. What is this war? It is a battle for our minds. How we think. In short, it is a war of consciousness. Now, Mr. Dennis summed that up pretty well, but not nearly as well as my friend Graham Hancock here, who I'm going to turn loose on you for a short 2-minute clip.
What I see in the Western civilizations, which I'm part of, has been a gradual trend over hundreds, thousands of years towards increased individual freedom, towards removing the unreasonable power of the state to intervene in our lives. This seems to have been the direction of Western civilization, except in one area where we've actually gone back rather than forwards in the last 40 years, and that is the area of personal individual use of drugs. It seems to me that if we are not sovereign over our own consciousness, then we can't meaningfully claim to be sovereign over anything. It's useless, a complete waste of time, to indulge ourselves in all sorts of self-congratulation about how free we are, about how our democracies are a model of freedom. when we're prepared to send people to prison for exploring that most intimate, that most precious, that most sapient part of themselves, which is their own consciousness. I feel that the war...
Thank you. Yeah, Graham really says it best. If we are not sovereign over our own consciousness, then we are not sovereign over anything. The title of my talk is Living in the Exile Nation. It's a series of talks I've been giving all over the United States and Europe for the last year or two. Living in the Exile Nation is my way of describing a particular kind of existence that takes place in the United States. It happens here in Europe as well, but not to the same degree and not exactly in the same manner. And of course, Europe is far ahead of the United States as far as progressive policies towards drug use, and it doesn't have even the minutest fraction of a crime or an incarceration problem like the United States. Just to be clear, the United States, the so-called land of the free, the so-called beacon of freedom for the world, incarcerates more of its citizens than any other nation on the planet, including China, which has roughly 5 times the population of the United States. By current figures, there are currently about 2.5 million people that are currently sitting in a prison cell in America. There are another 7.5 million that are being monitored by the state on a daily basis. There are an additional 13 million who have a felony conviction. There are an additional 65 million Americans, that's about roughly 1/5 of the population, that cannot pass a background check to get employment because they have an arrest or a conviction on their record. I realize that this is a personal question, and I definitely forgive you if you don't feel like answering, but by a show of hands, how many people in this audience have either been arrested or convicted or incarcerated in their life? God bless you all. Thanks for showing up. I really appreciate it. And thanks for staying here. Thanks for getting here is really the question, because so many of us never make it out. And so the Exile Nation is this nation, this population of millions of people that are living in a kind of a form of internal exile in the United States. They are disenfranchised peoples. They are second-class citizens. They mostly do not have the right to vote. They do not have the right to hold most forms of legitimate employment. Anything that involves a license or an insurance bond, they are ineligible for. They can often never work with children, old people, students, hospitals. They can't work for the state. They can't work in the private sector. Now, why is this? This is enough people to build an entire new civilization if they were all put to work. There's lots of reasons. I'll go into some of them during my talk. And ultimately, they boil down to what everything else boils down to when we're looking at it: money and politics. There's another side to the Exile Nation, and that's very much the literal interpretation of exile, which is somebody who has been thrown out of their country. Now, the people that I'm talking about in this sense are the millions upon millions of immigrants that have been thrown out of the United States in the last few years. This is actually something that goes very underreported in the world media. It's something that most Americans are completely oblivious to. And there is a kind of a political smokescreen around it, around jobs and budget cuts and social services and crime, that's all used as a smokescreen for what is essentially a pogrom to round up and deport as many non-citizens as humanly possible, and as you will see later in some of the clips from my film, many actual American citizens as well. In the last 2.5 years alone, 2.5 million people have been thrown out of the country under an initiative that the Obama administration calls the Secure Communities Initiative. Secure Communities. And the advertising campaign they used to launch this campaign is that every day in America, 25 American citizens die at the hands of illegal immigrants, usually through drunk driving and gang violence. And that's their ad campaign. Get them out. They're dangerous. Now, when we talk about this, what they usually mean are Mexicans, because they're not throwing a lot of English and Canadians and Swedes out of the country. But the darker your skin tone tends to be, the more eligible you seem to be for deportation. The lower you are on the socioeconomic scale, the more eligible you seem to be for deportation. So, before we get into any of all that, who am I? Why am I talking about this? Why do I care? Okay, this is a real privilege to be here in front of this audience. I really enjoy speaking with Europeans because they are rational thinking people. And they have a lot more history than my country does. I'm always reminded of that Eddie Izzard joke when he was touring Los Angeles, and he said the tour guide said to him, "Some of these buildings date back to over 50 years ago." Our drug policies are even older than some of the buildings in America, if you think about it. But the reason I talk about this, the reason why it matters to me, is because I went through this. So I'll tell you a little bit about my background, and I'm not going to give too much away because, you know, my book sales are lagging, and if I give away the story, you guys are never going to buy it. So I'll just give you a little teaser. But basically, I battled a very serious drug addiction for about 10 years when I was in my 20s. I got into this addiction because of I had post-traumatic stress disorder. I was the victim of serial violence, rape, and sexual abuse when I was younger. I was nearly killed a couple of times, and I spent about 10 years as a crack addict, living in the cities of America, in the ghettos, trying to survive. I overdosed a couple times, was found dead a couple times. Somehow, I just keep coming back. And about age 30, I just decided I had had enough and got out of that life. And I did it white-knuckled and bare-toothed and any other way you can imagine, just sweating my way through it, trying to find something else to channel my energy into. And what I ended up becoming was an activist. I had been doing a lot of activism for years, but I hadn't really gotten involved in, you know, deeply tactical, organized movement. And this was now, you know, right around the 9/11 and the Bush administration coming in. And the country was changing and the world was changing and things were happening that I just couldn't believe other people weren't seeing and saying, "Oh my God, why isn't anybody saying anything about this?" And I was kind of one of a few voices of lone dissent back in those days, screaming to the high heavens, "Why can't you see this?" And it mostly fell on deaf ears. I was an organizer for the Green Party, and I was an organizer for the anti-war movement, what there was of it in America. Thank you very much, Europe, for showing up for the rest of the world. Whereas you put 10 million people into the street on February 13th of 2003, we could barely manage, 1% of that. It was very disheartening, but I still went into it. I still fought it for a number of years. And right around 2004, I became really disillusioned after the Bush administration stole another election, and we looked like another 4 years of insanity was coming, and I was really burnt out, and I decided to get out of Chicago. There were some reasons there. That's the place I was living at the time, and a lot of it had to do with the activist work I was doing and how much the Chicago police didn't really appreciate it. I got myself into a real bad situation with them where they decided to make an example out of me for an entire group of people that I worked with that were trying to defend and free a number of Latino men that had been locked up for murders and violent crimes that they didn't commit. They had been scapegoated. And there was a whole bunch of them, mostly because they were children of immigrants and they were too afraid to speak out. And then most of them didn't know the language and they couldn't defend themselves and they didn't know the culture. And so I'm not going to go into the details because, like I said, it's in my book. But I needed to get out of Chicago. I needed to get away. And I came to San Francisco, California. And I had not been one that had tried many psychedelics in my life. While the rave era came and went, I was, in a crack house. So I kind of missed that entire cultural explosion that happened beginning in the early 90s and ending in 2000 when most of the Western world passed some form or version of the Rave Act. And that whole culture was kind of shut down and sent back underground, literally. And so I was 35 years old and I was in San Francisco and I was looking for a way to find meaning and to find purpose again in life and to rejuvenate myself and have hope again because I had none. I was just really angry and really bitter, and I was like 4 years away from a really serious drug addiction, and I didn't really understand anything except rage. Rage is about it. I met a guy, and within a 2-week period, he reintroduced me to LSD and MDMA for the first time in almost 15 years. He introduced me to the work of MAPS, and he gave me DMT in liquid form, cut with some ketamine and a shot in my butt. And let's just say that it changed my reality. So anyway, I don't know if you guys have met any other people that were in their mid-30s when they have a psychedelic revolution, but basically you can see a few of them walking around. They tend to wear white robes and walk around wanting to hug everybody. And, I call them missionaries because at that age you have a particularly strong effect because, you've been living a certain way for so long, and then all of a sudden you're living differently, and you're living the way you want to, and you're feeling free, and you're feeling love, and you're feeling happiness. And it's a very precious thing, particularly when you don't know that, when you come from violence and abuse, and all you've known is the dark side of life. Those psychedelics, that psychedelic awakening is almost like being reborn. In fact, in many ways, it is being reborn. And I was caught in that space when I was caught again by the Chicago police. And I got sent to prison for a year for having 11 pills of MDMA on me. 1 year of my life for something that barely fit in my hand that just made me want to give everyone I knew a hug. Where's the sense in that? And after prison, I found that I had to go through the same thing that most people in America go through, except for the fact that I was blessed with two things. One, I was born white, and two, I had a college education. And in America, both of those things really matter. And so, whereas I'm here today able to talk to you about this, 95 to 98% of the people that go through this situation are never able to come out and talk about it. They live in an endless cycle of going in and out of prison because there's no jobs for them when they come out. And so their only option is to engage in illegal activity again to survive. And so they eventually get caught again and they go back. And so the recidivism rate, that is the rate at which people go back to prison in the United States, is hovering above 60%. Now, what all this is essentially a socioeconomic issue. And I'll get into that first. There's a couple of good writers, Christian Parenti, who wrote an amazing book on prison called Lockdown America, and the great Noam Chomsky. They both talked about the concept of surplus population or surplus labor. That's when you have too many people in an economy to employ. And so most of the colonial empires, including America, were built using slave labor. And you use the slave labor, you build the new nation, you build the empire, then you expand, then you start conscripting other colonies into it. But we also had the benefit of mass immigration. We had millions upon millions of Europeans come to America and become part of the American dream. That kind of happened in phases throughout the country, but there's always been some kind of anti-immigrant backlash from the right wing in America. But in the 80s, there was a whole new wave of immigration. And this was, again, because the economy was changing drastically. And the kind of middle-class dream that the post-World War II generation had grown up with was evaporating. And we were entering into this kind of postmodern technological finance and service-based economy. And we needed different people to pick up the poop and clean the toilets and clean the houses and be the janitors and dig the trenches and wash the vegetables and all of these things. And then when the economy tanked and they weren't useful anymore, then suddenly they started getting rounded up and thrown out. And before this happened to the immigrants, this happened to actual citizens, mostly the African American community. Now, each one of these things has a different intention behind it. They all have the same result. The same net result is to remove extra members from the population that are no longer needed or no longer serve a purpose. But we can start with the biggest victims in the American system, which is the African American population. What ended up happening there is pretty simple. In the 1950s and 60s, there was a big civil rights movement. It was an explosive civil rights movement, and it ended up resulting in something like 35 to 38 major urban riots between 1965 and 1969. I cannot express to you the depth of the fear that put into the hearts of white America when they saw the cities rising up and exploding. And then on the backs of that came the black militant movement, the Black Panthers and such. And what was, essentially formerly a slave class, then, a segregated class, an apartheid class, and now finally just a despised part of the lower class, were now organizing to change their situation. And anybody who lived through that time knows that revolution was on everybody's lips. And the country came very close to collapsing a couple of times, just like it is today. So what did they have to do? They had to find a way to neutralize this population. There's a lot of theories out there. We can speculate all day, but let's just talk about the facts. Let's talk about what we actually know. All colonial empires, all of them, have used trafficking in illicit substances to expand their empires. They've sold opium, they've sold cocaine, alcohol. They also sold sugar, coffee, tea, spices. Basically all things that somehow alter consciousness. And those commodities were the prime movers of the colonial empires. And when the United States, I mean, we talk about Britain, they fought 2 wars with China just to have the ability to get their people strung out on their opium, okay? And we learned in the States very well from the Brits about how to do this. And so with the African American population, you have a series of events that kind of coincide with problems or perceived problems from the white classes. During the slave era and the Reconstruction era, there was a lot of cocaine that was circulating around dock workers in New Orleans that were predominantly black, and this is where this kind of myth about the cocaine-crazed Negro got started. In the 1960s, during the Vietnam War, massive and plentiful supplies of heroin were suddenly popping up in all of the cities where all of these riots were taking place, at the same time that we know that our government was flying this opium out of Laos into Vietnam, where it was given to a good portion of the 10 million soldiers that were in country at time. And at one point in time in around 1970, at least 1/3 of these soldiers were strung out on this heroin. That same heroin found its way back to the United States into the ghettos and decimated the black population just at the moment that the Black Power movement was getting started. That kind of went by the wayside in the 70s while the whole country went into a period of retrenching after the Nixon administration and the debacle of the Vietnam War. But in the early 80s, it started up again, and black communities started getting organized again. And the United States once again found itself in a position where it needed to fight another war, this time in Central America. However, we were only about 5 years away from the Vietnam War. And so the people of America were not entirely psyched about getting into another foreign entanglement. Because of that, Congress eventually passed a bunch of laws amended to certain bills that prevented our Congress, our elected representatives, from giving money to either the CIA or the military to conduct wars in Central America. They had to find a way around that. The way that they found around that was something that they learned from Vietnam and the trafficking of opium, which was the trafficking of guns and drugs. And in this case, it was cocaine. And in this case, it was a lot of cocaine. It was a lot of cocaine that came north and got dropped into American cities and eventually became the crack cocaine epidemic, and a lot of guns that went south to arm the militias, the right-wing militias that we were funding and training to take out democratically elected governments all over Central America. Everybody following me on that one? Okay. So, why is this? Well, guns and drugs are expensive and they bring a lot of money, and you don't have to report it to your government, and you don't have to report it to anybody, and intelligence services all over the world have been involved in the drug trade and still are, because it allows them to perform what are known as black operations. A black operation is when you have to have an operation, but it can't be acknowledged and it has to be denied plausibly, right? So this is what we call social control, this is what we call political control, and this is also what we call weeding out economic classes, surplus labor, and surplus population. Okay, so let's look at another class. The first drug laws in America were passed in San Francisco, preventing middle-class white women from going into opium dens, because there was a big problem back then with middle-class white women getting strung out on opium. The Harrison Narcotics Act and all of these things were responses to massive epidemics of addiction when cocaine and opium became widely available in commercial products like Coca-Cola. A lot of these things marketed towards housewives to relieve depression and anxiety and so on and so forth. The first marijuana laws were passed as a way of arresting Mexicans in Texas because Americans weren't familiar with what they called the loco weed. But the Mexicans were. They brought it across the border with them. They found it growing on the side of the road. They smoked it. It made them laugh, made them silly, made them have a good time. And for a bunch of Christians that were trying to build an empire, that was no good. No fun. No fun in this empire. Dour faces everybody. So what could we possibly gain by trying to restrict what people ingest into their bodies, and what's the point behind it? I mean, if you really think about it, what are the reasons that we have drug laws in the first place? If you look at it right now, somebody just shout out one of the reasons why the politicians tell us we need to have a war on drugs. Control. But they don't say that, do they? They don't say we need control. What do they say? It's because of crime. Thank you. It's because of crime. Okay. Well, let's look at that. Let's look at the crime issue. I can just talk about the United States because crime's a serious issue there. Not nearly in the way that it is in Europe. The crime levels you have, particularly violent crime, are virtually non-existent in comparison to American standards. But what's interesting to note about the United States is that the peak of violent crime was in the mid-1970s and in the early 1990s. The mid-1970s was right at the time when the Nixon administration collapsed, when gas prices skyrocketed, we'd had the oil embargo, the economy was in the shitter, people were generally bummed out, social services were breaking down, the economy was changing, and people were losing their means of support. It's no wonder why there was a crime wave. Many theorists have said for years that capitalism and crime go hand in hand, that capitalism needs crime. It needs a criminal underclass to point at and to say that is what you don't do, and this is what you do. Now, if you look at, somebody with dark skin robbing somebody in a park for $20 in a purse, and you match that up against a white guy in a suit who robs a hedge fund of $200 billion of people's retirement funds, who's the bigger criminal? And yet, who's the one that's most likely to go to jail? Crime has been going down steadily since 1994 in the United States. Even though there's been a kind of a mild spike and increase lately, the murder rate is at its lowest point since 1979, and yet there are more people in prison now than ever. Why is that? People are committing less crimes. If crime has gone down, if we have better surveillance and security techniques and so on and so forth, then why is it that so many people are in prison? Well, the conservatives will tell you it's because we got them all. They're in prison, and that's why the crime rate is low, because we got them all, right? But then you start to look at the numbers. Okay, well, why are they there? Well, when you're looking and you see that something like 55 to 60% of all of these people are somehow in prison on a drug-related crime, you start to say to yourself, wait a second, what's going on here? In the United States, they punished black people and white people differently by punishing crack cocaine and powder cocaine differently. You got 5 times the punishment for crack cocaine that you got for powdered cocaine. Why was this? Because powdered cocaine was expensive and used primarily by affluent whites, and crack cocaine was cheap and used primarily by people of color and poor people. There's a one-to-one relationship from all of this stuff. And what all of this really means is that it's a pretext, right? The war on drugs is a pretext because we all use drugs and we all alter our consciousness, all of us. There's a researcher from UCLA, a really amazing guy named Ronald Siegel, and he wrote a book called Intoxication, The Universal Drive for Mind-Altering Substances. And in this book, he says that our desire to transcend our consciousness or to alter it can be considered what is known as our 4th primal drive behind procreation, sleep, and nourishment. And where did he figure this out? He figured this out by looking at the animal kingdom and then looking at the evolution of humanity and seeing how throughout history humans would watch animals, watch their behavior, see what they ate in order to see what was edible and what wasn't, right? And so if the reindeer came up and ate this little patch of grass over here and then keeled over, they would know, don't eat that grass. Every once in a while, there was a kind of an unexpected side effect from what they were eating. Reindeer famously eat the Amanita muscaria mushroom, right? Elephants love to get drunk. So do monkeys, right? It's just a kind of a universal phenomenon. We get trapped inside our heads for too long. We just need to get out somehow, some way. Life is hard. Life is stressful. We all need release. We find that in a lot of ways, through our spiritual practices and our ecstatic practices. through sexual release, through fun, and through chemicals. The job of religion was to try to co-opt that urge in you, to eliminate all other forms of this kind of practice, of this kind of like release, and to have it monopolized by a religion or a spiritual practice. Now, building on that, I just want to kind of read a little something that this writer named Carol Moore wrote. She said, "I believe that a prime motivation of those waging the current war on drugs is to discredit and destroy any counterculture before it becomes the dominant culture. Religious fundamentalists have not forgotten the religious upheavals of the 1960s when millions of young people, often after using marijuana and other psychedelics, reading Timothy Leary or Alan Watts, or listening to psychedelic music by the Beatles or the Jefferson Airplane, rejected Christianity and Judaism. Even ministers, priests, nuns, and rabbis abandoned their callings. Consciousness, altered consciousness, and higher consciousness, rather than obedience, duty, and sacrifice, became the prime concern of this new spirituality. The response of Catholic, conservative, and fundamentalist religious groups was to feverishly expand their efforts to enforce more fundamentalist views among their members and to gain greater political influence." By the way, this is what happened in the 1980s with the conservative revolution and Ronald Reagan coming into office and changing the whole direction of American foreign policy and American economic policy. While fundamentalists have lost many battles over abortion, prayer, and pornography, they have found the government a willing ally in the war on drugs. For just as drugs, the counterculture, and consciousness undermine faith in hierarchical religious authority, so too do they undermine faith in political authority. Now, Siegel here, again, I mentioned Ronald Siegel. He says in his book, "History shows that we have always used drugs. In every age and every part of this planet, people have pursued intoxication with plant drugs, alcohol, and other mind-altering substances. Almost every species of animal is engaged in the natural pursuit of intoxicants. This behavior has so much force and persistence that it functions like a drive. Just like our drives of hunger, thirst, and sex, this fourth drive is a natural part of our biology, creating the irrepressible demand for drugs." Let me say that again, the irrepressible demand for drugs. It's not even a desire, it's something that we actually need, according to Siegel. In a sense, the war on drugs is a war against ourselves. It's a denial of our very nature. Legalization is a risky proposal that would cut the drug crime connection and reduce many social ills, yet it would invite more use and abuse. Making some dangerous drugs illegal while keeping others legal is not the solution. Outlawing drugs in order to solve drug problems is much like outlawing sex in order to win the war against AIDS. It's interesting that he mentions here alcohol and tobacco. Both of those are legal in most Western nations. Both of those kill more people than all the other substances put together and multiplied times 10, probably. And yet, they're legal. And they rake in billions a year, and nobody ever says boo about it. Oh, maybe they'll say a little something about, oh, you shouldn't drink too much. Don't drink and drive. Bud Light. Not drinking and driving. Brought to you by Coors Light. It's insane. And yet we look at what Rick Doblin and Cosmic Care and these people have talked about beneficial medicines that have the potential to heal, the potential to cure, the potential to help people grow, transcend, the potential to resolve conflict in the world, the potential to evolve our species past this terrible bottleneck that we're stuck in. And those are all illegal. Now, what's interesting is that we're sitting here in Portugal, and Portugal tried an experiment 10 years ago with decriminalization. Since I've been here for a couple months and I've spent a lot of time talking to people, I've got a pretty good idea of what I think happened here in Portugal. And it's pretty amazing in comparison to some other societies. Portugal has always kind of been isolated in comparison to the rest of the European community. They retained their vestiges of their older culture longer than all the other nations. They have been looked at somewhat differently in a lot of ways by particularly Northern Europe. And because they had this kind of self-sufficiency and this kind of isolation almost forced on them by conquering empires from the south and so on and so forth, they had more of a closed culture, and they weren't as experienced to other things, right? And they had a colonial empire, and this colonial empire eventually fell apart through a series of disastrous wars in the 1970s that ended up bankrupting the country. And what was normal in the 1970s and up until that time was a kind of steady flow of hash and marijuana from Africa, from some of the colonies, that dried up when the colonies disappeared. And in started to flood opium and heroin, which, as I understand from the people here, they weren't that familiar with culturally. So when people were looking for some kind of escape and they couldn't find their hash, they couldn't find their weed, somebody would offer them to smoke some opium or to smoke some heroin, and before you knew it, there was an epidemic. It became so bad that by the mid-90s, it was considered one of the 3 biggest social issues or social ills in Portugal, which is what caused the country to get together as almost a unified culture and decide and communicate to their leaders that they don't want to have drug prohibition anymore. And so they decided to decriminalize drug use. And from what I understand from the people that live here, it's not as if there's a free-for-all, and I've certainly seen it myself in Lisbon and other places. It's not as if you could just take like one of those chalking things that they do to make lines at the soccer stadium and like do it with cocaine down the street and get away with it. They're pretty serious about it. Like, you can get caught, but you don't necessarily go to jail. There's still the fear of it. There certainly were enough police out here busting people trying to get in with large amounts of drugs. That still happens, right? It happens because it's a huge economic engine, which I'll get into later. But ultimately, people here were allowed the ability to have personal use. And the statistics were pretty amazing. There was really only overall a 1% to 2% overall aggregate increase in use amongst the population. It spiked for a little bit, and then it went down, but ultimately it stayed steady, about 1% to 2%. It's absolutely astounding. Now, in other countries that have tried this, they've gone up and down with the amounts that you can have. They've gone up and down with the punishments you can have. They never really stuck with it until Portugal did. And it started a cascading effect. But yet, a lot of the guys that are my age, I'm 42, right? A lot of the guys that are here that lived through that, they describe exactly what it was like when a small country gets hit with the drug epidemic and everybody is caught up into it one way or the other. Without pointing out anybody or naming any names, it's like many of the men and women that I spent the last 2 months with, at one point in time really struggled with this. And it's something that they talk about, and it's something that they acknowledge. And in the United States, people don't do that. If you're a drug addict or you're an ex-convict, it's something that you just keep to yourself. God forbid anybody finds out about it. God forbid. Because it will ruin your life socially, it will ruin your life economically. And if you're in the wrong situation, it could potentially ruin your life legally. And it's a terrible burden for people to carry around. And now, if you can imagine the millions of people that are out there that are disenfranchised this way, imagine what the American government or the other governments think of all of these people. Sitting around, doing nothing, thinking about how pissed off they are that they lost their livelihood because of a drug conviction, right? Eventually, that pot's going to boil and explode. And a lot of the mass incarceration and the prison buildup that you see, and now in America we have like really scary things happening, like detention centers being built, hundreds of them across the country that are kind of at the end of rail lines and the former military bases that have been turned into holding centers for immigrants that have been rounded up in ICE raids, Immigrants and Customs Enforcement. That's the other thing. In America, immigration used to be run by the Immigration and Naturalization Service, right? The government was providing a service for you. They changed it when the Department of Homeland Security came around, and now it's called Immigration and Customs Enforcement. So one was to help you get in, and the other was to help you get out, So I'm looking at probably about a half an hour here. I want to jump a little bit and continue to talk about the immigration problem and talk about this new film that myself and my partner Mitch Schultz are finishing up over the next few months. Basically, this story came to me when I was filming the oral history film about people that have been caught up in the war on drugs. I filmed like 100 interviews over the course of a year. I cut about 30 or 40 of them into a film that dealt with 13 different topics. And everybody was kind of telling their story of what happened to them. Doctors, cops, judges, mothers, prison guards, activists, academics, clinicians, therapists, the whole spectrum. And one of the people I was interviewing was a guy named Chris Bava. Chris was a former heroin trafficker that was part of an international drug sting in the late 1980s. He ended up with about 8 years in federal prison. And he had a conversion in federal prison, came out, spent about 15 years completely clean and sober, a devoted yogi, right? And then he was living in Los Angeles. He's running a club. He got a tooth infection, went to the dentist, had some dental work done, and was given a supply of painkillers to help with the tooth pain. And within 3 days, he describes the kind of a rapid shift convergence experience where all of his sobriety disappeared, and he suddenly was fiending for his drugs more than he had ever before, and he ended up taking off on this 12-year run of just complete insane drug use. Ketamine, crystal meth, opiates of all sorts. Finally, he and his wife stumbled across the border to Tijuana about 3 years ago in search of Ibogaine, which was illegal in the United States and remains illegal. There's a small community of Americans who are giving treatments with Ibogaine in Tijuana across the border where it's legal. So he went down there in search of this community. And I caught up with him down there and was interviewing him about his life as a drug addict and as an Ibogaine provider. And we do this whole 2-hour interview. And I mean, he's telling crazy stories. He's a character. You'll get to see a little bit of a clip of him walking around, but he's got this long, wavy gray hair, and he's really, really big, and he talks in a voice like this. And he's just completely insane. He's been all over the world. He's an artist. He's an incredible photographer. And I asked him, do you have any final statements? And he says, yeah, I want to talk about what's going on with these immigrants down here at the border, these deportees. And I didn't have any idea what he was talking about. And so he proceeds to explain. He's like, did you know that every day something like 400 to 500 people are dropped across the Mexican border into Mexico, stripped of their identity, stripped of their money, and turned loose in the street? And he said that most of these people are people that emigrated to the United States when they were just children with their families. They were brought there against their will. They lived their entire life in the States. They learned English. They went to American schools. They played with American children. They absorbed and became American culture. And then, because of whatever reason, paperwork, money, time, a mistake, a wrong T crossed the wrong way, a checkbox not made, many of these people didn't have status, or they thought they had status and they didn't. And then at some point, they run into the criminal justice system, whether it's getting arrested for a violent crime or whether it's getting stopped for drunk driving or a traffic ticket. And they're run through the system and they find out that they're not a citizen, and the next thing you know, they're on a plane or a bus headed to the border. They can never get back into the States again. Their families, their wives, their mothers, their children, everybody and everyone they know is in the United States, and they're stuck in Mexico. Their families can't come to see them. They can't go to see their families, right? And when I got down there, there were literally thousands of them roaming the streets, living in the sewers, desperately trying to survive, ducking the Tijuana police, which are some of the most corrupt and brutal police on the planet, because they all work for the drug cartels, which infest this area of Tijuana where these people are allowed to live. And they're not really allowed to live because it's illegal to be on the street without an identification. So if you don't have an ID, you go to jail. It's illegal to do anything there if you're not a citizen or you don't have ID, so you go to jail. You try to deal drugs to survive, you go to jail. And going to a Mexican prison is probably one of the worst experiences anybody can handle. It's bad. I've got a couple of people that talk about it in great detail, including a young Cuban American kid who got caught up selling drugs for the cartels and spent about 3 months of what should have been a 5-year sentence inside La Mesa. And so La Mesa is a penitentiary in Tijuana. It's notorious. In 2008, it had a terrible riot that was reported all over the world, and something like 600 people were killed in this riot, and it's pretty bad. They rioted because they hadn't had a piece of non-rotted food for over 3 weeks. And Chris tells me that, every day the cartels would come around with heroin because it was easier to hand out dope to people than it was to feed them. It was both cheaper and easier because people wouldn't eat. They would just sleep. They would be docile. And he describes, cells of 30 people, small cells, people sleeping, head to feet and on top of each other, sharing one needle, right? So after I had heard all of this and met some of these people and looked around Tijuana and saw this going on, I realized that I had to do something about it. And thanks to the Sainsbury Foundation in the United Kingdom that has graciously funded my work for the last 4 years, I grabbed that camera right there and took it down to Tijuana and spent the better part of about 9 months filming. Now, I'm going to show you a couple clips from this. I want to say ahead of time that this is just raw footage that I have cobbled together from only one camera. It has not gone through editing and post-production and any of that stuff. So this is just kind of a general sketch. I mean, you'll follow it. It's not like it's, garbage, but it doesn't have cutaways. It's only shot with the one camera, and it was mainly made for me to show the foundation so that they could see what was going on down there and get a feel for it and know some of the characters. I've since shot 3 more times with a whole bunch of other footage, and Mitch and I are going to begin editing this film in the fall once we get out of the festival season. So the first character that you're going to see here is one of the main characters of the film. His name's Dragon. He was kind of our guide while we were down there. He's a former professional baseball prospect and a former champion kickboxer who emigrated to the States when he was about 15, I think, and was thrown out for a drug charge. I think I'll just let the clip say the rest. So.
Okay, my name is Javier Godinez Mondragon. I go by the nickname of Dragon. Okay, this is what I call home. This is the place that I stay at, and it's not very much, but this is where I've been staying for the last couple of years. Very, very sad place. I don't have very much. Everything is a big mess. Right now we're lacking electricity. We're about to go get some electricity right now, but there's 3 of us that's staying in this place right now. And, some of us have been using drugs, honestly, and we're just trying to survive right now. I was deported back in '97 for the first time. I actually went back the first day, but I've been here since 2001. I went to the States when I was 13 years old, and I lived there till I was about 29 years old. And the reason why I didn't become a citizen, it was because of paperwork and stuff. I should have been a citizen, I guess, in my teens, but because of paperwork, it took so long. And they're always putting it away for another date. It became I guess, too late. by the time that I was to become a citizen, I had already committed a crime. I had a small case of dope. It was marijuana, and I ended up being deported after I got out of prison. I left my wife, my 2 kids, my mother, my brothers, my sisters, everybody. My entire family lives in the States. I have no one here in Mexico. And have had tons of problems since I've been here. This is my friend named Joel. They call him Güero. And we both stay in this place for the last 2 years. This is our door right here, and this is our front yard. As you can see, we're so close to the States, but yet so far. This street right here, this is where many people have gotten killed, gunned over. As you can see, there's even the police out there. So if anybody was to be seen out there, the first thing they do is they try to run right away. Sometimes they don't look both ways and they get hit.
Por aquí, oiga, hay preocupación, unas 10 semanas, pregúntele a la gente, la policía los empezó a rodear, por culpa de ellos el güero se aventó para acá con su carro.
He said that 3 weeks ago, they were being chased, that one of the guys, they were getting surrounded right there, that's where he got hit. They call him Güero, he got killed right there. He was one of the guys.
Los policías riendo, se dice un pinche perro menos, dice que se acabe. El otro día también allá en la bajada. Ahí va la patrulla, mire cómo los persigue, mire. Ahí está. Vete para allá, vete para allá. Vean cómo persiguen a la raza. Mire, oiga. Mire, oiga, ya ve. He's leaving. The cop's leaving. It's fine. Just follow me out there. It's gone right now. I know it's going to be a good time because the cops are gone. See how crazy it is? But right now he didn't get off. He didn't get off because he saw the camera. That's the only reason why he didn't get off. It's sorry because this guys right now, that's the only reason why they didn't run right now, because the cops saw the camera. Yeah. I've seen about at least 5 people died on this sidewalk right here. There used to be crosses here, there, down there, and there's another one right there. That was a good friend of ours. It's a girl. Mire, aquí enseguida estoy buscando donde le puse droga.
Yeah, this cross, this is from a friend of ours. She was a little short girl. Her name was Jolie, and they call it a Chapis. She was killed about
right before Christmas. Yeah, right before last Christmas, she was killed. This is where her body ended up. She got hit very bad. It was about 10 o'clock at night. And just like you see the cops right now, they came running and boom, this is where they got hit. And the cops over here, they're a handful. Right now we should take a walk because the truck is up there. Come on. I remember about.
Okay. That wall that you saw behind him was the border between the United States and Mexico. And what happens is that when the deportees start to get chased by the police, they come into the neighborhood where they live and they close off both ends of the street and they sweep through and they attempt to kill as many as possible accidentally by running them over or chasing them into the street. Those that they pick up, they throw into the back of the truck and haul off to jail. And I've got footage of all of this taking place. But what the deportees are trying to do is to run over into the river because it's the sewer. That's where most of them live, and that's where they go to hide because the police won't go into the sewer drains. So let's go take a look at where they live.
To get clean choice. Because in the States, if he's help for you, a hand situation can help.
Say the most horrible thing that I've seen is the people living in the canal.
Okay, the ditch that we're looking at is some of the area that used to be all populated by hundreds of people. There used to be lots of houses and even houses underground because they used to be all full of dirt on top of all this concrete. They just been cleaned up about a month from now. They were clean. And as you can see, everybody has been moved away. They're just walking around and wondering, but in the night times, you see all these bridges underneath, and in the holes, they go in to stay warm, to stay away from the cold. The sewer that you're looking at right now is one of the places where people go in to actually live in there. The one that is closed, that's what some people call it home. There's actually people living inside of it right now. All of these are homes for people, you know. At nighttime, it's full of people. Everybody's out right now trying to make ends meet. But as you can see, it's the sewer. And this is where people live right now.
Me llamo Carlos Gómez y acabo de ser deportado Me sentenciaron con 5 años de prisión por haberme brincado para el otro lado.
His name is Carlos Gomez. He was just recently deported. He just completed a 5-year term for re-entry. And now he finds himself living in this gutter right now.
Perdí mi familia, perdí todo y ya estoy viviendo aquí como un perro ahora.
He said he lost his family and now he's living like a dog over here. Like shit.
Like shit. Salí en mayo 26.
He got off on May 26, and since May 26 he's been
Where were you living
wondering.
over there?
En Arizona.
Arizona?
He lived in Arizona.
Yeah.
You have family over there?
Dos niños.
2 kids?
Yeah. Me agarró la ley del arpaio del arpaio.
Oh, from Arizona,
Sí.
the new law, the sheriff.
Ajá.
The sheriff
Pero yo
are
pienso que me dieron demasiado tiempo, 5 años nomás por...
He thinks that they gave him way too much time. 5 years for re-entry. That's actually what.
Todavía traigo mi identificación de la prisión, mira.
If he re-enters again, what?
They told me I was gonna facing 15 years or 20.
15?
Yeah, they're not kidding.
Here's
That's my ID.
it's correctional.
POP?
Yeah.
It's POP number.
Federal time. Yeah.
Oh, federal time.
Terminal Island.
Terminal Island. I've been in Oklahoma, Atlanta, Tallahassee, Florida, and Big Spring. Es bien dura esta vida para mí porque yo estoy creado en el otro lado, ¿verdad? Pero
This life is way too hard for him because
y
he's
nos
been
deportan como un
raised in the States.
y nos deportan como un perro, tenemos hijos y todo allá y no les importa al gobierno, man.
Say that when they deport you, they don't give a shit if you have kids, if you have family over there. They don't care. They just
Está feo eso.
ship you out like a dog.
Ya, yo quiero ver a mis hijos y todo y no puedo.
He's been trying to see his kids ever since, and he hasn't been able to.
Fucking cry every night. I'm dreaming of my kids. There's nothing I can do.
I was raised since I was 9 in the United States. I went to school out there, grammar school, high school. And now I'm facing here in Mexico. I ain't got no family out here. And the government here doesn't help us at all. If I could go back to the United States, what do I face? I face 5 years, federal time. So, I don't know, man. They should do something for us. Just give us a hand to get a job. Because you get a job here and all they want to pay is $5. That's not life. Sometimes this is the way we're living now, in the river. Nobody cares for us. They think we're dolphins and the way we look, because we ain't got no clothes. We got no place to take a shower. We got to shower in the river. Walking around and the cops just pick you up for nothing. I don't know, man.
They don't feed you there or nothing.
Nah, they don't feed you there. They give you 36 hours. You walk in the streets. Of course, you got no ID.
Okay. So the river that you were looking at used to be home to approximately 2,000 to 3,000 deportees. Sometime last year, while I was just shortly before I got there for one of the month-long shoots that I was there for, the police went into the river and destroyed the shantytown that existed there. What you saw was the remnants of that shantytown. At least 8 to 12 people were killed when they set fire to the town and ran them over. And they've been since pushed further and further out. All of this was done because Mexico was having an election. So what you don't know about this is that there was one party in power for 70 years in Mexico, the PRI. And they lost favor, and due to some shenanigans from the U.S. government and the Bush administration, who helped rig an election, they put a right-wing government in and launched this war on drugs, the Mexican version, where something like 55,000 people have been killed in cartel violence in the last few years. This has resulted in this kind of slamming shut of the border. It's my personal opinion that this whole war on the cartels thing was just a ruse. It was just a well-orchestrated plan to give the American government a reason to slam the border shut. And the reason they're doing that is not just because of immigrant labor, but because millions of undocumented Mexicans come into America, work, and then send their money back to Mexico. And that's a big no-no for the United States government. So it's those people that they're after. But the Americans get rounded up as well. There's a point in the film where we get a call from this group called Previn Casa. It's a charity that hands out needles and clean water and everything down in the sewer, and they keep very detailed census on the population down in the sewers. And they took us down there for a couple of tours, and then they told us to kind of meet them at the governor's mansion because the government had decided to send 2 bus loads of immigrants or of deportees back to their families. And we got there and we realized that the deportees, yeah, they were there, they were getting on a bus, but none of them spoke any English. They were all wearing clean clothes. They had suitcases. And we suddenly realized, oh, wow, these are migrant farm workers that don't speak any English and that have families here. And so they're being sent back and put on a bus because when they get to the border, someone meets them and says, hey, do you have family here? And if they say yes, they call up their family. They say, hey, is this Javier your son? Can we send him home? And if they say yes, then the person gets to go. In Mexico, family's everything. If you don't have family, then you're abandoned to the streets, and that's the case of most of the Americans. I also look at, a couple of other stories, all of them equally tragic. It's a real problem. And hardly anyone knows about it. Oh, I've only got a couple minutes here, so I'm just going to wrap up really quick. Cognitive liberty is the ability to learn, to feel, to experience life, to medicate yourself, to educate yourself, to operate in the manner that is best suited to you and your being, your brain, your functioning patterns, what have you. This war on consciousness is also a war on this cognitive liberty, this ability for us to decide what medicines and foods and things we want to put into our bodies and which ones we don't. None of this is going to change unless everybody in this room does something about it. Every last one of you. Every last one of you is here at a psychedelic festival enjoying yourself. But that freedom that you have to enjoy yourself at this festival comes at a cost. For every one of you that's here enjoying yourself, there's probably 10 people in prison for something close related to this. There's like 27,000 people here at this festival. There's millions of people in prison for doing the exact same thing that you guys are doing right now, going out to do tonight, and will continue to do for the rest of the week. Right? So what's the difference? Why should you guys be here enjoying yourselves at a festival and they should be in prison? It doesn't make any sense. But it will only last as long as you allow it to last. And the freedom that we have will last only as long as you are willing to defend it. If you let them take it away, they will take it. Trust me, they don't want you to have it in the first place. And that's just real. The small 1% of the world that runs and controls everything are afraid of you. They are terribly afraid of you, particularly if they got to see some video of what's going on over at that dance temple right now. They'd be real afraid of that. And what I'm saying is, they don't have to be, but they are. So let them be afraid. But when the moment comes, stand in your power, speak your truth, be who you are, don't back down, and stand for some real freedom. This war can be won, you know, and without all the semantical debates of, well, you can't wage war on an inanimate object, which is what people say all the time when I talk about this, as a way of deferring the argument. Instead, I say this is a real war. I am a veteran of this war. All the people that raised their hands are veterans of that war. And we're glad to see you guys here. Thanks for making it out. I give a whole nother talk on what happened afterwards and the role of this festival community in helping people find a new home to come to and find a place to reinvent themselves, to heal, to learn how to build community, to learn how to connect with other people, and to learn how to share these substances in a nice set and setting where they can lead to growth and lead to good things. It's a different story. I'll tell you some other time. I just want to thank you all for coming by and listening to me tonight. Meant a lot to me. And we're going to take a little bit of a break here, and then Daniel Pinchbeck will be out. So thank you very much.